Quarter to 1, okay,
Yeah,
no, that's
okay.
fine. As long as we're up by 2 o'clock.
Yes.
Be right. Now you have to tell me about Susan Island.
Yeah. Well, you know you're sixth generation First Fleet,
Mm-hmm.
right? And your boys are seventh generation, right? There's up to about the 12th now.
Wow. Yes.
And anyway, so John Small the first, he was given his ticket of leave, but his wife Mary Parker, they were married on the 17th or 19th of October 1788, and she was attached to the hospital at the Rocks, the tent hospital at the Rocks, as was John Small then, because he came over in a ship, either the Charlotte or the Lady Pentram. It's all documented.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember which one. And he was attached to the ship surgeon. I think you know that part of it. And he was given the run of the ship because he was like a servant. He had been a Marine in the War of Independence with the USA.
Oh, okay.
And that was the first that the Small clan knew, the Australian Smalls knew of his background.
Okay.
So he'd been a Marine, and then after that war finished, he returned with the ships back to the UK, and he was given exit from the Navy.
Mm.
So there's evidence and the costs of all his time as being serving in the Navy off his pay for the years that he was employed by the Navy. And I think he got 17 and sixpence, $1.76.
Wow.
And they even took something off for his musket, and this, that and the t'other. So, Jack, come over here. Jack, come on.
I'll get him. Come here, Jackie boy. Come on.
Pull that up.
Yeah.
Make a movement in there and he's onto you.
There you go. Oh, there you go. Come on. Come here.
I'll take him, he's alright. I got it. Thanks. And so he was given his ticket of leave, and there was a terrible
There you
depression in the UK at that time.
go. Right.
So there was so
Okay.
many people out of work,
Mm.
and so he couldn't get work.
Mm.
So in desperation he joined 3 other people, 2 mature men in their 40s and a 16-year-old boy, and the 4 of them turned into highwaymen.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Okay,
Mhm.
so they tried to rob a coach, and the 2 men in there, mature men. John Small was about in his early 20s
Yeah.
at that particular time, and the boy was 16, as I said. I don't know if he was 16 when this happened, but anyway, he was 16, and that's all we know about him, because they were captured. They weren't very good highwaymen.
Okay.
But the 2 mature men
Mm.
carried pistols,
Okay.
so they were hanged.
Oh.
But John Small, because he'd been a Marine, he was put on a hulk in the Thames awaiting transportation.
Mm.
And they were on, I don't know when this would have been, it's all documented anyway.
Okay. Okay.
But he was on this hulk until the first convoy of the colony, the group, left the UK for Australia. And they came over, and they first landed in Kurnell. I don't know if you boys know that. And there's a plaque if you go take them to Kurnell. And Uncle Jim took me there after your father died.
Oh.
I'd never been, and I didn't know. And there's a little monument there,
Mm-hmm.
just near the foreshores and in Kurnell, where they landed, and that's where they were going to set up their colony.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But the terrain wasn't applicable,
Mm.
so that's when they moved to the Quay.
Sydney Harbour.
Sydney Harbour, thank you.
Mm.
Anyway, so on the way over, because John Small had served as a Marine, he was used to shipboard life.
Mm.
And the ship that he was on contained the surgeon for the convoy.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So John Small acted as his servant, but there's an article in a book called The Surgeon General, I think it is, or Survey of Memories of the Surgeon, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the National Library in the city. And there's a little paragraph there that the prisoner Small was clapped in irons in the brig for imbibing on the medicinal brandy.
Oh, there you go.
So that's the note, and from the journal of the surgeon.
Mm.
Well, when they set up a colony in Sydney Cove,
Sure.
the surgeon stayed on shore, didn't go back with Captain.
Philip, or whoever went.
No, that's
that's right.
Philip stayed.
That's right. Okay.
I don't know who was the one in charge going back. I don't know that part of history. But at any rate, so they eventually set up the tent hospital at the Rocks. And in the meantime, Mary Parker had been in the prison ship for the lady prisoners. So it was all planned very well in the UK. They selected prisoners, women, to come over in the convoy to set up a stable colony. And then Philip arranged in October that he encouraged the prisoners to marry. And so John Small married Mary Parker because they were both attached to the tent hospital. Mary Parker had been a lady's maid, so she had a fair bit of responsibility, but the mistress became sick. So Mary Parker in the UK, she became her nurse, and then the poor woman died, but not Mary Parker. So Mary Parker, before she died, this lady, she gave her a handkerchief or a fan or a comb, whatever little article in appreciation. Well, after she died, that was taken, and they wanted people to colonise, so that was classed as theft.
Oh dear, so the family must have been really petty with the will or something.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, isn't that dreadful?
That was not the only case. There was so much of that went on in the Depression, because the people, the wealthy people, had to conserve their wealth, hang on to it, and so they didn't want all their staff, I suppose, and the government was encouraged them to convince them. I don't know, but Mary.
It would have been a depression, because there was a depression in the 1890s, another one in the 1830s.
No, this was 17.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, they happen about every 50 years, 48
right,
and a half
fair
years.
enough. That would
So
be, I suppose.
late 1700s would have been ripe for a depression, and so that would make sense.
Well, when was the War of Independence? That comes into it, because that would have cost the Brits quite a lot of money.
It would have too. Yeah.
And they had been expanding the empire dramatically up till that time. Now I love history.
Yes.
But at school I hated it.
Oh, so did I. No, I love history now, but not the history that they teach you at school.
No.
But there's so much more to history, and history became a form of propaganda, a form of ideology.
Well, no doubt in your
in the English tradition. Well, actually, the Catholic school system got set up in the 1890s because the Catholic bishops couldn't stomach what the school system was teaching as history, which was all just anti-Catholic.
Oh, yes.
And there would have been a big...
Well, Henry had a lot to do with that.
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's where it started, because you see, Henry, he had to make up a story to justify him sacking the monasteries.
Yeah.
And so he went in and took the monasteries. Well, the first thing he had to do was tell these stories that the monks were dreadful people and the abbots were, tyrants and all sort of carry. And that started, there was a fellow, Richard Green, apparently in Elizabeth I's time, who started this English tradition of making history as fantasy. And I got onto this story big time when I was studying philosophy, because one of the philosophers who now is heralded as this great guru of philosophy, David Hume is his name, he basically bankrolled himself from the sales of his History of England. And I remember when I was studying philosophy being told that Hume's History of England is really just a story to suit the English sensitivities. It's got nothing to do with history. And I remember studying this in philosophy, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And Hume, he's a wacky kind of thinker, and his philosophy is really dreadful. He has the title of being the father of British empiricism. They're basically the father of British modern philosophy. Yeah. So he's heralded as this great guru, great thinker. Yeah. But his history is fantasy.
Warped.
Right. And his philosophy isn't really much better. But then there was a fellow in the 19th century, there's actually two people in the 19th century. There was a fellow, John Lingard, and another chap, William Cobbert. And Cobbert's History of England is absolutely fascinating to read.
And that's the genuine, honest.
Cobbert was, I think, a quartermaster or something in the British Army. So he had an administrative position. He was literate, so he was moderately educated, but not school educated. And he had a lot of spare time because he was simply there as the administrator. I think he might have been quartermaster or sergeant, something rather. And so Cobbert had an awful lot of spare time and became a kind of a do-it-yourself scholar. Very loyal Englishman. And the lovely thing about reading his history is that he's a very loyal Anglican. On the other hand, all of his history is talking about why Henry VIII was a rogue and why there's sort of lies and deception all the way through, from the 1500s onwards. And here's this loyal Anglican saying, basically, my culture, my history, my religion is fake. And so Cobbert's history is delightful read because he's a very lovely man. He wrote another book called Rural Rides. A tremendous title if you want a tongue twister. Rural Rides. And what he did, he hopped on his horse back then he left the army. He hopped on his horse and took himself on a travelling holiday through England. He loved England. He was a very loyal Englishman. And the Rural Rides is like this journal.
Yes.
It's very personal,
something like
very informal.
The papers.
Something like that.
Yeah.
He had a newspaper that he was the editor and owner of, so he was fairly comfortable.
Where was he stationed?
I can't remember at the time, but the Rural Rides.
It took him everywhere.
Took him everywhere, and all the way through, he's saying, I've got to so-and-so Shire or whatever, and here is this magnificent, cathedral or a ruin or a manor house. And he'd say, the history I've been taught, I'm paraphrasing, according to the history I've been taught, this building shouldn't exist. And the fact that it's here, tells you that something else is going on in the history of my country. And so it's this self-discovery pretty much on the ground. And he's lovely, he's honest, he's common sense, And so anyway, those two books are really lovely. Anyway, I've kind of got you off the topic.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
When you come into sort of the 18th century, there was so much funny business going on.
Oh yes,
and
graft.
It sounds like our forebears were really victims of it.
Definitely.
I didn't know anything about Mary Parker, and I think the only thing I knew about John Small was that, I didn't know what he ended up in chains for.
No.
But anyway, I've kind of got away with the story.
Well, that wasn't evident really because what happened in 1972, I think it was, we came back from the International and Veteran and Vintage Car Rally, where we were officials, and Nan was caring for the family. Okay, and we were only there, and before we came back, I think, just by a few days, Carmel, the sister, died.
Oh, okay.
and she was up in Casino. She had gone up, and Nan was, we got off the topic, but it comes into your history. I don't know if you know this part of it, but Carmel married a man called Ted, what was his name? Ted, I should, it'll come.
Ramsey.
Ramsey, thank you.
That's right. That's
Ted,
right. Yeah, and Neil and all those
That's
boys.
right, they're his sons. Ted Ramsey was a widower, and he had a couple of boys. Never had a girl. I think he had 2 sons, and one of them is married to Auntie Molly's best friend, Betty, and they're both dead now, of course, by a number of years. Anyway, Ted Ramsey worked in the same office as Carmel, Nan's sister, and she, as a young woman, was living in Casino. She lived with her parents, the Lays, and she had then come to Sydney, and she was working in Sydney during the war, and she was a young woman, and she met this nice Air Force man, and they wanted to marry. Now her parents were living on the river at Tatham, and your great grandfather would have been, Donovan. He was the ferry master on that during the war, and but so her 2 brothers. Well, there were 3 brothers. Well, anyway, say there was 2 brothers. That was Uncle Jack Donovan, and then there was Joe. Joe was the younger one. I don't know if there was another one. Might have been only the 2 boys. Anyway, they Joe Donovan was in the Air Force as an aircraft fitter, and he was colourblind, but then he turned into an electrician, which was the funniest part. Another story there. But and I think that it's Ben that's the electrician, isn't it?
Francis.
Francis, I beg your pardon. Francis would be tickled with this because this man was colourblind, and he built himself a television set. And he built this television set when you were a little boy, and we didn't have a car at that particular time, and he lived on Manly Vale Hill.
Oh yes, I remember.
You
that.
remember that place, yeah.
And I think I remember the television too.
Oh yeah. So when he assembled it all, and of course there were no transistors in those days, it was all valve, but there was some of the components that were colour-coded.
That's right, the resistors would have been.
The resistors, fair enough, okay. Well, I know, because he couldn't read the colours, he had a kit, and so he inserted these resistors in the wrong order.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And so he started the setup just with the chassis. He never had a
No,
box
that's right.
or
No, I remember it. It's a chassis with...
with the big tube at the... Yeah,
that's right,
all of
that's
that.
right.
That's right,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
He set it going. We've got right off the track. But anyhow, he set it up, and of course it wouldn't work.
No.
So the first thing he did was to contact your father. Now we had you, I think we had you, and Joe Donovan was, because he'd been a returned serviceman, and he had been up in Darwin when the Japs raided Darwin twice, okay, with the Air Force. So that was classed as being a returned officer because of the air raids and things, whereas anyone else just stationed in Australia was not regarded as a returned soldier or serviceman. So they weren't given the privileges of the return men who had fought and existed overseas in nasty areas. Okay. So he was in the ballot for a lot of land that was given out by the government to rehouse these ex-servicemen and their families, because by that time a lot of them had married and so on. And Manly Vale Hill was one of the sections that was subdivided, and he got this private place, big block right on top.
I remember the spot. I remember playing out in his backyard. It was
just
a bit of a rocky desert, but it was a magnificent spot.
He could see the 2 heads
Yes.
and, South Head.
Oh, no, to be...
Absolutely brilliant. He could see the old Morris Brothers Seminary.
wow, yeah.
Seminary. He could see all of that and all this, that and the other. It was a beautiful spot. But being with his wisdom, he was self-read. He had spent 1 year in Riverview College.
Oh, okay.
Because the king in Casino District, the Murphys, they were the wealthiest, and the big old man Murphy was called the king because he owned all the land around the place. So the king had a boy that went to school in primary school with Joe Donovan. And of course that boy was sent to Riverview as a boarder. Now the war had just started, but it hadn't got very far, say the first year of the war, when this boy was going to go to start first year.
Okay.
Or sixth class. One of those 2 years, as you remember in your time. So the king approached grandfather Donovan to see if he would permit Joe to accompany his best friend from school.
Oh, isn't that lovely?
Down there. He didn't offer to pay.
Oh, dear.
Oh, that's how he accrued his money. He wasn't generous. But he was also very good to CJ.
Okay.
That was from the other side. I'm talking about the Donovans. And so grandfather Donovan, he used to make coffins and things, and he was a carpenter. He had a bit of a skill, but he wasn't a cabinet maker apparently. Although at one stage, Nana Donovan, who was the local midwife, and no schooling or anything in that field, but she was the selected midwife for the district, and then she had been involved with the terrible Spanish flu.
Oh, yes, okay.
Now at that time she had young children, so they were stationed in the old convent at Tatham.
Okay, yes.
And it got so bad that she succumbed to the Spanish flu.
Oh, dear.
So of course she was confined to one of the beds in the convent, and the school was then trapped. The kids were having to go to casino or not at all. Okay, so she was dying. She really was dying. Now she's told me this story herself, and because being an Irish...
This is Nana Donovan?
Nana Donovan.
Well, okay, so she was dying in 1917 or 18 or something from the Spanish flu, was that? Would have been back then?
Whenever the Spanish flu.
Spanish flu was 1917. I think it may have spilled into 1918.
Wait a minute.
Or maybe a couple of years later. But
Well, yeah, that must have been a bit later.
no, that'd be about right, because she would have had mum, like Mary Small.
That's right.
And
She had two boys.
and Mary Small
And she had 4
was having John, like Dad, in sort of 1930?
31.
So...
Yeah, that would be right.
That'd be right, because...
That'd be right.
Yes, because...
It was definitely
mum...
an epidemic.
Yeah, because that way, that'd be about the right age group-wise.
Yeah. Well, Nana Donovan was one of the nurses in the middle of it all, and she succumbed. And she's in this bed in the... Some people reckon that she was hallucinating, but she was convinced it was God. And she was dying.
Knowing Mum Small and what I remember of Nana Donovan,
Oh.
it wouldn't totally surprise me if it was God himself.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So she was dying, and she knew she was dying because she nursed so many people, very clever woman. And so she wanted a pact with God. She had these 3 children or 4 children, whatever she had at the time. And she said if God spared her to raise her children, she'd die immediately that they were self.
Wasn't that lovely?
And supported. So she lived till 92 or something. Yeah. And so she was always astounded at that. And she told me this story. And she said that God gave her her wish, and that she was definitely convinced
She was a marvellous woman. I mean, I only remember her as a very old lady.
Yeah, in the hostel.
Hostel. That's right. I used to go and visit her with I mean, I always called Nan Mum because when I was spending time up there.
Exactly, you did. I understand that.
Yeah.
But so she was a great old lady, but a true Irish lady. So that's the story with that. I don't know, I got right off the track. What we were talking about? We were talking about... Joe Donovan.
Joe Donovan and...
so we've gone right back.
No, I'm still waiting for Susan Island too.
Oh, well, do you want me to halt with the...
This is lovely. This is so good.
Get back to Susan Island. Yeah. Okay, well John Small the First was attached to the tent city.
Yep.
And then he was given his ticket of leave. And some of the tales which weren't exactly right, that he was hardly ever a prisoner, and that he was attached to the governor's guards.
Oh, okay.
But that was fair dinkum in later times when the government house was in Parramatta.
Oh, really? Because he had a property at Ryde.
Yes, he was given a tract, not only at Ryde, but he was given a tract of land at Riverston. Now, there's even the plots, and if you go through the history, there's the survey notes of the property he owned along the river at Windsor, Riverston. Okay?
Okay.
Right. And so, at any rate, this is later on when he, this is in the 1800s, when he had a number of children.
Sure. And
he was living at Ryde. And he had a timber mill on the river, on the Drummoyne Bay there, the Victoria Road side. Okay, and it was there. So he had John Small, he was the eldest boy, and then he had Thomas. Had a big family, so the other members don't come into it. But Thomas and John Small were young men, and they worked with their father. He had ticket of leave, and he had this timber mill, and some convicts on their way to Norfolk Island. The ship foundered somewhere and floundered, and so these prisoners, 2 men, as far as I remember, escaped. And they ended up on the mainland near the Clarence River, between the Clarence and the Richmond.
Maclean or somewhere up around there. Yep.
So they were helped by the Aborigines. But, of course, they were recaptured. And the Aborigines kept them alive. But they were recaptured and sent back wherever, and that was it. But part of their story was that they related to the powers that be, that there was this great river and stands of beautiful cedar.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? So John Small the First heard of this, and he just said he was doing good work and he was accumulating in wealth. So he bought the coal ship, the Susan. It was a coal. Okay. And he bought this little coal ship, sailing ship, and he fitted it out to his requirements. And then he got a crew, and his 2 sons, John and Thomas, sailed up the coast, and they came in at the Clarence, and they came along to the Clarence. And they needed a little haven to camp. Sure. And they came to Susan Island, and there was a little island in the Clarence River, and there they set up. Well, because it had no name, it was not settled, they named that the Susan Island, and that's the
after
origin.
the name of the bird.
Yes.
Right.
So there's a little monument in South Grafton if you go up. It should be still there in South Grafton, near the river, saying and depicting how it was settled.
Oh,
Not settled as such, because it was only a very small island.
Sure.
But the origin of the Susan Island.
Wow.
I don't know how many people know of it,
Yeah.
but that was the origin of Susan Island. So that's where they sailed in. But eventually they sailed on and they went to the Richmond and the Maclean. And so Thomas Small and his clan, his his descendants, they are buried on a little island in the Maclean River. And it was only the Sunday before your father, he had his fatal heart attack on the Monday, and he turned 69 the Thursday before. We went there in the Jag with our friends from Nambucca Heads. One had a Jag and one had a Bentley. And we went there with our
Grand touring.
We went and we took them to, and it was in Canefield.
Oh, is that Lawrence Island?
Yeah.
I've heard of Lawrence Island.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're all buried there, and the little babies that died, the descendants of Thomas Small and John Small, of course, he was up there too, but I think he was the main one who kept it, he would ply up and down the coast when they exhausted the cedar supply up that way, that they became, the two of them, had a ship each, no doubt, and they would buy timber, buy cedar, and take it down to Sydney to the old mill in Ryde.
Oh, so it's still the original John Small's mill, or the Small family mill.
Yep.
Wow.
So that, and then John Small, I think he's still there. He's buried in the old graveyard in front of St Anne's Church in Ryde.
Yes.
Okay? And Mary Parker, she's buried in the Field of Mars. I don't know if she's been moved.
Okay.
But that's where she had been buried. I don't know why she's not there with him. I have no idea. But at any rate, she may be moved now. I have no idea. But Mari Kempton and I attended the first get-together of the small John and Mary Parker clan association. And
I think I went along to one of those.
oh yes, I still
Up Ryde.
I must send them some money because they send me the bulletins and the invitations, and I used to pass them on. But so of course there's still the get-togethers, and they've all gone computerised now.
Sure.
But I don't know. They've issued another couple of books, by the way.
Oh, have they? Okay. No, because those details.
Yeah, so I can give you their website, I think.
Okay.
Or Sequoia and David should, because all the evidence is over there now. I don't have anything at all. And the get-together is in October because Mary Parker and John Small married either the 17th or the 19th, 1788. And so John Small was still there at the Ted Hospital.
Sure.
And then he was given his ticket of leave, and he was attached to the governor's residence in Parramatta.
Okay.
And until he was really flourishing, and he was given these properties. I don't know which order he was given this, that and the t'other, but so it was only in the early 1800s that the bark Susan, was called a bark, it was the shape of the ship, sailed up to Clarence.
Okay. Now that makes sense. And the two brothers, because the brothers that
John and Thomas.
John Thomas sort of settled up there.
Yeah.
But then there was the hotel at Coppenhurst.
Yeah, that would have been a descendant of either John.
Because wasn't it CJ's
That's right.
father who was the butcher or something? Or?
That's right. Now John, we come, well, it's class B, is
sure.
we. There's descended from John, the eldest son.
Okay. Yep.
Right. So I think, but he's the eldest son, but he's not the firstborn of Mary Parker and John Small. He's second, because there was a girl first.
Oh, okay.
So the first number
Right.
in the registration is 2.
Mm.
And then so John Small is second, like that's 2, and then the next downwards as a small is number 5.
Okay.
So it's 2, 5, and then number 6, and then we come to Cyril, CJ's father,
Okay.
the butcher.
Right.
He is number 5, and he was the second son, or the second child.
Ah. Okay.
So it's 2, 5, 6, 2, I think, or it might be 1. So 2, 5, 6, 2, and then your father was 1. He was the firstborn, and then you are the firstborn of us. So you're 2, 1, 1.
Extraordinary.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So you're 6th generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then your children have those numbers and then in their order of birth.
Mm.
So your
I'll have to follow that.
grandchildren would be the 8th generation.
Yes.
They'd be
Yes.
the 8th generation, I think.
So Justin's.
He's your first son, but he comes in 7th, doesn't he?
The 7th generation. That's right. But he's sort of continuing the ones down.
Yeah. And then so his
son will be also
son,
another
he's
1.
8. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, he's another number.
Yeah.
So he's 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he's the only small
Yeah.
descendant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So far.
that's his number. So I have not notified them of a lot of the great grandchildren, and I should do that.
No, we should get onto that.
Should get onto it because it's all computerised now. And if you want to take it over, that'd be lovely. But if you don't want to take it over, I don't know what Mari has done or Carmel, because they're both computer literate.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Mari probably more inclined. Carmel seems to run her own race these days from the conversations. I'm very fond of Carmel, but
yes, Carmel's.
I'd like to spend some time with her. Poor thing.
She's had a rough treatment with
She
her
has.
eyes. You know,
She
her
has.
eyes are pretty.
Oh
she's
yeah.
had some
Well, with a lot of things too. With,
yes.
with Chris and all that.
Oh gosh, yes.
I mean, in a sense, Carmel and I were wayward together.
Well, that's right. You were very similar in ages.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, but like brother and sister, we're closer than Brian and I. It's 5 years between us.
Yeah.
But it makes a difference. Makes a great difference. And of course, Mari was in the cusp. And Mari's still with the older siblings.
Yep.
But Carmel is with you.
Yep.
Always.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's very interesting. So that's the history of John Small the First and Mary Parker.
Oh, thanks for that.
And
We better go.
Going.
Okay.
Otherwise you're